Hi, I'm Jim Gabe, founder of CITIZENARTS. Welcome to our new episode of In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. This series takes a close look at some of the vast range of people who serve us at the federal, state, and local levels. Why a close look? Because we entrust them with responsibilities and powers that affect our lives in big and small ways every day. If you haven't listened to our prior episodes, please do. You'll hear that state secretaries of state do far more than certify elections. For example, fighting cyber election misinformation. You'll have an interview with a non-judgmental judge who cuts through the critical public discourse about justices with insights into the noble role of those called to the bench. And we introduce you to a state rep, a self-described lifetime fighter for equal rights who gets 90% of her community's vote. In this episode, CitizenArts is honored to present a conversation with William Fitzpatrick, District Attorney for the City of Syracuse and Onondaga County in upstate New York. As DA Fitzpatrick puts it, he's a prosecutor born to solve homicides, to do justice for his brothers and sisters. His judicial innovations have improved prosecution practices and saved lives throughout the U.S. His accomplishments have been recognized by his peers and by his fellow citizens, who have voted him to be their DA for more than 3 decades. You'll find his full bio in the show notes and at citizenartscreative.org. Welcome, District Attorney Fitzpatrick. Thank you for taking the time to join our discussion.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to be with you, too.
Before we get into some of the meat of our discussion, I want to ask you just about something that's been in the news a lot. I'll start with this quote from the New York State Constitution. The governor may remove an elective sheriff, county clerk, district attorney, or register within the terms for which he or she shall have been elected. In Florida, 2 district attorneys have been removed by the governor. I didn't know a governor could summarily remove an elected official like that. Do you find yourself looking over your shoulder?
Well, it's a good reason to have a good relationship with whoever the governor is at the moment. It's happened a number of times in New York where it wasn't challenged. Many years ago, Jim, there was a DA in a small county in New York who didn't think that people should be charged for having a 6-pack of beer and trying to drive home, which is absolutely absurd. And the governor removed him, and that didn't really create a lot of controversy because of the lunacy. But there were 2 controversial removals or superseders that occurred. One was in the 70s, and it involves the Onondaga County, my home county, where the governor replaced the local district attorney with a special prosecutor, a former assistant DA from Manhattan. And his job was to investigate corruption in the Republican Party in Onondaga County. It resulted in a number of indictments. There were some minor misdemeanor convictions, but ultimately it turned out to be kind of a fiasco. It happened again in the 90s when the DA in the Bronx said he was never going to enforce the death penalty. And then a New York City police officer was assassinated in the Bronx, and Governor Pataki superseded him. So it's a fairly broad power that the governor has. And as long as it's for some, articulable reason, however you may disagree with that reason, it appears that it would still be enforced today.
I'm not looking at this from an ideological or political point of view. I just, as a voter, I find it unsettling that a governor, and goodness gracious, governors have their own issues, right? And New York State is an example of that. That a governor could remove an elected official, someone like a DA. It is what it is, but I don't like it.
I can understand why you don't like it. Give you a more recent example where it could have happened. If you recall, in the recent gubernatorial campaign, Republican Lee Zeldin made no secret that he was going to, quote unquote, fire Al Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney. And I'm not thrilled with that. I don't have the same prosecutorial philosophy that Al has, but ultimately he campaigned. He did not hide who he was. If you look at his campaign website, he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And isn't that for the voters of Manhattan to decide if that's the kind of DA that they want? I was not comfortable with it becoming a political issue, but ultimately became moot because Governor Hochul won.
Very much so. What are the principal roles of the district attorney in New York State?
Ultimately, a DA's job is to do justice in their county. Your primary responsibility is to keep the people in your county safe. But you have to be consistent. You have to have standards. I have some wealthy suburbs. I have some impoverished areas in the city of Syracuse. I cannot be letting a suburbanite teenage burglar go into some diversionary program and send a poor, disenfranchised, impoverished kid from the inner city, probably a kid of color, to state prison. You're not going to be DA very long if that's the way you enforce the rules in your county. You have to enforce them fairly and evenly. And I guess the simplest way is have some compassion. It's not against the law to be a compassionate district attorney in the sense that not everybody belongs in jail. I'll take a shoplifter, for example. I want to know the why. Why did the person steal? Is it a 16-year-old single mother and she's stealing diapers and formula and she got caught and it's her first offense? That person does not belong in the criminal justice system. That person belongs and needs to be referred to social services because those items are available for free if she's a single mom. Is it a career criminal? Is it somebody in their 20s and 30s who just steals things because they're lazy and it makes life easier for them and more difficult for you and me when we have to take 5 minutes to buy, shaving cream because it's under lock and key at the local Walgreens? And then that big category in the middle, the individual with a substance abuse problem, he or she is stealing to support their habit. Let's give them, doesn't it make sense, an opportunity to divert themselves from the criminal justice system. So to answer your basic question, Jim, the duties and roles are as diverse as the community you serve. But ultimately, the bottom line is you got to do justice and keep your community safe.
Thinking about your role for the people in keeping it safe, I think I've always had this impression that you represent the victim, but you don't represent the victim per se, do you?
Well, in a sense, we do. But the title of the case is not John Jones versus Mary Smith. The name of the case is the people of the state of New York. And the defendant is part of the people of the state of New York. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in court and we will correct mistakes made by the other side because of a sense of fairness and that we don't want to try the case again. When I'm prosecuting, let's say, a homicide case, and I've got a victim's family in there, I can't tell you the personal pressure that puts on me because they are so devastated. There's no closure in violent crime. There's always an empty seat at the table. So when I feel that pressure that they are looking to me and members of my office to, give them some sense of justice in the case, that's a tremendous feeling of pressure. I almost feel like I am representing those individuals. But if you're a zealot, this is not the job for you.
You have been elected 8 times as DA for a jurisdiction that includes the city of Syracuse,
right,
and Onondaga County with a total population of about 500,000. You referenced the people you represent. You have rich people and you also have people who are very much at risk. Has that profile of the population been evolving over time? And has that required a change in the way you do your job?
Some suburbs are maybe 90% white and 10% other, but that's going to change remarkably in the next couple of years because we've just landed a multi-billion-dollar contract with the company Micron, and they're going to build a plant here. They're going to bring thousands of new citizens into Onondaga County. We've also, in the last probably 10 to 15 years, had a fairly large influx of immigrants, particularly Asian and Somalis. And that makes, for a more diverse and I think a better community. And some people who come here and have not quite assimilated to American culture, they don't trust law enforcement because the places where they came from, law enforcement was so corrupt and oppressive. No such thing as search warrants or due process or constitutional rights. So I continually engage in outreach to those types of communities and let them know that we're there to help them. A lot of people, for example, in the Asian community don't trust banks, so they deal in cash. There's a nefarious set of people that know that and that will try to prey on them and then hope that they'll remain silent because of their distrust for law enforcement. So I have to break those barriers down. And then we have another 10,000 people at Syracuse University. They bring a lot to the table, both economically and culturally. So I think we have a really good, hardworking, honest population. It's hard to pinpoint whether we're white collar or blue collar.
Well, you mentioned Syracuse University, from which you have undergraduate and law degrees. I'm curious, sitting there in a classroom at Syracuse, was being a DA on your radar? Was it something you were thinking about in those days?
Here's what happened to me. My dad was a New York City cop, wound up retiring as a detective, and I revere him. And when I was about 11, he gave me a book about the Lindbergh kidnapping case. It was 500 pages long, a lot for an 11-year-old to absorb. I started reading it, and I couldn't put it down because that case brought forensic evidence to the forefront in a court of law. And that's been a passion of mine ever since then. There were times when I would change my mind throughout the years and going to Syracuse University for the great Newhouse School. I certainly considered the idea of being a journalist and doing crime reporting. But ultimately, I decided to apply to SU Law. My intention was to become a prosecutor back in New York City, just to go back home because Brooklyn is in my blood. But a local guy here saw me in a moot court argument and liked me and offered me a job. And the rest is history. I never left.
Let's talk about history. Let's go to your first election in 91. What was the road you traveled that positioned you for your first political campaign? Had you run for office before?
No, I ran for secretary at Severian High School, and Paulie DiPietro beat me handily. So I was soured on politics for a period of time. But what happened was this. I had moved up the ranks fairly rapidly in the DA's office. I think I was 32 when I became chief assistant in charge of the Homicide Bureau. And you're talking about people that, were normally in their 40s or 50s that would occupy that position. And I had a very good success rate in trying murder cases. It was something I was just born to do. And then I had this case where a woman set a fire. She killed 2 kids. And I set about putting the case together. Unbeknownst to me, my boss had already looked at the case and told the detectives that there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute the case. I wound up indicting the woman. My boss, I think, justifiably got very upset. I wound up leaving the office and I went into defense work. I lined up support. I got, people behind me. In 91, I announced that I was going to run. And I ran incredibly for an open seat. I ran unopposed.
I didn't realize you had work as a defense attorney.
I did, Jim. It was extremely beneficial to me in molding me as a prosecutor.
So I read Michael Connolly books and John Grisham and so forth. And there tends to be built-in tension between prosecutors and defense attorneys, with prosecutors feeling that they are maybe 10 rungs above in terms of human status versus the low-life
20.
defense
It's 20.
attorney. 20? Looking at it from your purview as a DA, what is the nature of that relationship? The defense attorney versus the people's lawyers being the prosecutors? It's
really not a lot different than sports. You can have a person who is, a longtime member of the Red Sox and a longtime member of the Yankees. And on the field, they're going to try to beat each other's brains in. But when all is said and done, they can be, in some instances, extremely close friends. There are some defense lawyers who I can't stand the sight of, but it has nothing to do with them being defense lawyers per se. It has to do with them not having any scruples. There are some former prosecutors that I never liked that just have no business being in this business. They don't have the temperament, they don't have the judgment, and they don't have the ethics.
From your perspective, what would be some of the major personality differences required to be a successful prosecutor versus being a successful defense lawyer?
Well, the rules are different. I'm a defense lawyer. My client walks in and says, there's something wrong with me. I just like having sex with children. And yeah, I had sex with that 11-year-old girl. So what's my job at that point? Am I supposed to walk into court, well, this guy's facing 25 years and stand up to the judge and say, Judge, I can't even stand being in the same room with this guy. He might not like this, but we plead guilty, throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. Well, obviously not. You'd be disbarred as you should be. Now let's reverse it. Let's say the prosecutor is trying the case against a defendant, and the girl victim walks into your office and says, you know what? Never happened. Mom and dad are going through a divorce. Mom said the best way I can really hurt dad is if you say this, this, and this. Well, I have an absolute legal obligation to inform the defense about that and inform the court and dismiss the case. Now, there could be a number of things that are more nuanced and more subtle than the example that I just gave. But the basic rule is that the DA, and I tell my ADAs,
that's assistant district attorney.
Assistant district attorney. An assistant district attorney is never afraid of the truth. A defense lawyer, his obligation is not to the truth. His obligation is to his or her client. Not lying, not suborning perjury, but arguing to a jury that the proof just isn't there, even though in your heart of hearts, you know it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's your job. I mean, so that in a nutshell is the basic difference between the two sides.
Being a defense attorney comes with some built-in trials and tribulations, doesn't it?
It does. But let's take it from my point of view as a prosecutor. I've probably been to 400, 500 homicide scenes. And each one is a human being that's no longer with us. Some of them are children. I prosecuted a father who suffocated 3 of his children over the course of 8 years to get insurance money. I've seen people killed for 50 cents. A high-profile case that I'm prosecuting personally right now in Syracuse, a little girl is outside getting a quart of milk on, ironically enough, Martin Luther King Day, and she's shot in a gang crossfire and killed. And there's an Iraqi veteran Syracuse police officer, massive big guy, cradling this little angel in his arms, trying to blow breath into her lungs unsuccessfully. I mean, those things affect you. We just started in the National DA's Association a wellness clinic. A lot of the seasoned guys were like, come on, we're tough. We don't need that stuff. And it really has turned out to be quite fascinating. We have a website you can go to, people you can talk to, and get help if you're suffering that, type of thing.
You mentioned the Newhouse School, certainly right up there among the top journalism academic centers in the world.
Certainly is, yeah.
And I'm curious, law is complicated stuff. How would you grade the media in presenting the DA's world?
Most journalists I would give low grades to, C's or D's. You hear just moronic things. And then it seems mandatory that, a lot of the networks, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever it is, will interview, Joe Blow, former federal prosecutor. It's a different world in the federal system. 95% of the violent crime in America is prosecuted at the state, local level. And you very rarely see qualified people talk about it. But there are exceptions, like Dan Abrams. And he's very knowledgeable about the law. Dave Ehrenberg in West Palm Beach. He's frequently on MSNBC, and he's an elected DA, very knowledgeable about the system. Janine Pirro, Westchester, former DA, she understands the system and she can talk about it. Sometimes it's difficult to get complicated concepts out to a TV audience based on the limitations you have, usually time. I'm not pals with the local reporters, but they know me and I'm very accessible. They all have my cell phone number and my email address. And I try to keep them educated because it's important to me. They're my method of communicating to 500,000 people. I'm not a big social media guy, and I can't send an email out to 500,000 people. A lot of elected officials, particularly DAs, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the pending investigation. Who made up that quote? Okay, I'm a reporter. I just saw 5 people walk out of the grand jury, And they're all related to this one case that I know you're investigating. Why are you coming up with this camouflage? Why not just say, look, it's an investigation. Yeah, it's ongoing, and I can't say a lot. If the grand jury takes action, I'll inform you. I think it behooves my colleagues to have a better outlook and outreach to local reporters, and maybe the national people will jump on board as well.
Speaking of outreach, Fitz, you're going to be seeking re-election for the 9th time this coming November.
Right.
You said this will be your last campaign.
Right.
Any changes in your outreach to the voters for this last campaign?
Well, I think it'll be very similar to the one from 4 years ago, particularly because I'm running against the same guy. But in terms of looking at the 9 across the spectrum, clearly the number one difference is the methodology of communication. When I started, it was strictly TV, radio. TV if you could afford it, and radio if you had something of a campaign war chest. And then maybe some mailers. And then people, when I started out running, they said, well, you got to go door to door. Door to door is just not, you don't get the bang for your buck. I might spend 5 hours and connect with 5 voters because people don't answer the door, not home, they're doing something else. And sometimes you can have encounters of, hey, okay, yeah, thank you. Give me your mail, or, I'm having dinner or something like that. So to me, it's clearly the social media mechanism, Facebook and X, what used to be Twitter. And then a lot of people get their news online. That to me is the biggest difference.
You've been recognized repeatedly for your work as a DA. For example, the New York State District Attorney Association Prosecutor of the Year, and the New York State Bar Association Outstanding Prosecutor. What does it mean to be the Prosecutor of the Year? What am I to make of that?
Well, I tell you, talking about the Bar Association, it's very flattering because you and I were just talking about the adversarial nature of the relationship between defense lawyers and prosecutors. And most of the members of the New York State Bar Association, particularly in the criminal section that awards that Prosecutor of the Year, are practicing defense lawyers. So that means a lot to me that people who practice to beat you in court can recognize that you have skills and talent. From my DA colleagues, it's even more significant because there's 62 elected DAs in the state of New York, one for each county. It's nice to know that they recognize you. We will call each other for problems. Big city DA, small town DA. I've encouraged that my entire life. And I think my colleagues recognize that, and they know that I'm going to give it to them straight. And it's also flattering, too, that a lot of DA's offices statewide and nationally have copied programs that I've introduced.
Could you tell us about areas in which your work has had a ripple effect in the DA biz? Sure.
One would be what I call best practices. I started that here in New York, and now 30 states have it. And what that is in a microcosm is you bring together the best minds in the state on a particular criminal justice issue, and you come up with uniform practices that apply to every jurisdiction in that state. Let me give you an example. Identification issues. I am not a fan of a prosecution based solely on stranger eyewitness identification. It can result in wrongful convictions. I just exonerated a gentleman who spent 16 years in state prison for a crime he didn't commit that was based in part on eyewitness identification. I established through the Best Practices Committee uniform identification procedures throughout New York. And I think that's prevented wrongful convictions. The second thing I did was create an ethics committee. Prosecutors have to be the leaders, not the followers, in creating ethical standards. Now we started a New York State DA's Association ethics advisory opinion. If you have a situation where you're unsure how to act in a case, there's a number you can call, and you get immediate feedback from line prosecutors who, in all likelihood, have encountered this situation before. We also send out bulletins going through all cases that deal with our obligations to turn over evidence to the defense regarding credibility problems of any witness that we may have, whether it's a police officer or a civilian. And the final thing I'll tell you is this. I became involved in a case regarding a woman who had murdered 5 of her children. Each one of the deaths was labeled sudden infant death syndrome. A doctor became a multimillionaire pushing his theory that these deaths were all genetically related, and they were all related to sleep apnea. And he had all these graphs, which were absolute gibberish. Together with my colleague, we brought her to justice and convicted her. When she was finally exposed, and this quack was exposed, the SIDS rate in the United States dropped by 50%. That was a fascinating case. It's been the subject of a couple of books. It's professionally probably my proudest moment.
Your staff includes about 50 assistant district attorneys and about 35 some odd investigators. So who are these folks? What do they do on a daily basis?
Well, if you're an assistant DA, you're going to be assigned to a bureau. It might be the municipal court bureau, city court. You'll deal with misdemeanors, assault, drunk driving, harassment, minor domestic violence cases. That's for the relatively new assistant DAs. I want you to cut your teeth there, learn how to handle cases, witnesses, marking exhibits, order of proof at trial. And then eventually you're going to be doing, rape cases, homicide cases, and serious long-term drug investigation. I have a narcotics bureau. I have a rackets bureau that deals with economic crime, which is extremely busy. I've never seen such an influx of thieves and con artists out there, particularly with more social media and the internet, more elderly being victimized. So those people are extremely busy. Then I have a special victims bureau, crimes of usually a sexual nature against children, sexual crimes against women, children, or adults. And those people have a special place in heaven waiting for them, because it is so unbelievably difficult to sit and listen to a child who finally discloses some horrific act that has been perpetrated on them by someone that they thought loved them, someone that might even be biologically related to them. And then you have the Violent Felony Bureau, the DWI Bureau, Driving While Intoxicated Bureau, and the Homicide Bureau. And then lastly, law and appeals, the people that have to argue to preserve our convictions in higher courts. And my investigators, you name it, they do it. The one thing they do that line police officers don't do is they prepare cases for trial. They have to sometimes subpoena witnesses, make sure the witnesses show up, make sure they're on time. Worst thing that can happen to you as a trial attorney is when you say to the judge at 3:00, Judge, I don't have any more witnesses, I'm sorry. And the judge is going to say, you just wasted 2 hours of my time. But they often do much more exciting things than that. I've never taken a file on a major case that the police give me and not made it better. And I make it better with my investigators because almost to a man and woman, they are retired police officers from other agencies, and they've achieved a great level of success in that agencies. I have literally hundreds of years of homicide investigation experience with the men and women that work for me.
You have hired over the years many people, assistant DAs, investigators. What are the 2 or 3 most important things you're looking for when you sit down with somebody and try to find out what they're really all about?
I'm not worried so much about grades. I look for character, and I look for integrity. Can you communicate well? Do you have a sense of humor? The best trial lawyers tell the best stories. And it's not that much different than a social interaction. There's always a person at a party that people want to gravitate towards because he or she is going to be telling a funny story. If you have a good sense of humor, if you can communicate, you're going to be a good trial lawyer. We have a pyramid process. They ask you to do writing samples. What would you do in this hypothetical? And you work your way up the pyramid, and then you come to me. Most of the time, they are just simply wonderfully dedicated, great people. Some people are in it for the long haul. Some people are in it they want to get trial experience, and they stay 3 or 4 years. And I understand that. It's comfortable pay, but you have a group of people that are saddled with, in some cases, 6 figures in law school debt. And if you want to go into the private sector or even the public sector as a public defender, you're going to make more money. So I'm looking for people that are altruistic and committed to public service in the Bobby Kennedy mold.
Is the demographic of your staff reflective of the community?
Yeah, a DA's office has got to resemble the community it represents. When I started, I think there were 25 assistant DAs. no minorities, and one woman. If I juxtapose that to 2023 and I had 50 ADAs, two women and no minorities, there's something wrong with me or the office or something else. So my office looks like Onondaga County.
I have wondered about the relationship between district attorneys and judges, both public officials, both being paid out of the same till, but very different types of jobs.
Oh, no question. In my vernacular, a judge is an umpire. A DA, a defense lawyer, are players. And you get conflicts when the umpire tries to be a player or when the player tries to be an umpire. That's where most of the conflicts arise from. I mean, it's funny, Jim. Gallup does a poll every year, most admired profession, and conversely, least admired profession. And if you look back historically, invariably, least admired 1 and 2, lawyer, politician. But then when you go over to the most admired, it's judge. But wait a minute, a judge is a politician who also happens to be a lawyer and ran for office to get elected. I don't understand that. I have the expression, judge, stay in your lane. You may not think I know what I'm doing, but I've somehow plodded along for 45 years successfully. I have a high conviction rate. Just bear with me. And you make the rulings. Judges are no different. You have really high quality judges, and you have some judges that I have real concerns about whether or not they belong on the bench.
DAs are often at the forefront of cases that have sensitive legal, social, political, and other manifestations. Is there a case where your role was particularly challenging?
Well, great question. 40 years, several hundred homicide investigations. Certainly the woman that murdered her children was right up there. The doctor that murdered his wife, which I had to try twice because of juror misconduct. The woman that murdered 2 husbands and almost got away with it by antifreeze poisoning. But one case stands out, probably the worst guy I ever prosecuted. His name was Hubert Allen. And I remember that we videotaped his interrogation. This was back in the 80s. So confessions were not routinely videotaped back then. And I had some really tough resistance from various members of the Syracuse Police Department about videotaping confessions. This guy had been involved in 8 prior homicides. People that were very, very close to him, including his previous 2 wives, were homicide victims. He had never been charged with a thing. Never come across my radar screen because it happened years before I became homicide chief. So on my watch, his now 3rd wife is stabbed to death here in the city of Syracuse. They had a 7-year-old son in common. He's missing. The entire community is galvanized looking for this little boy. After about 2 weeks, we haven't made any progress. So I authorized the arrest of Allen on a parole violation, and we interview him. He talks and talks and talks. It's 6 hours of tape. Admits to absolutely nothing. It's a complete mystery to him where his son is or who killed his wife. 2 weeks after that, we find the little boy's body washed up on the shores of Onondaga Lake. Cause of death, strangulation. And I spent the next probably 4 or 5 months meticulously building a circumstantial case. We didn't have DNA back then. We had fingerprints, but not on a murder weapon because we never recovered a murder weapon. During the trial, I played the 6 hours of tape. And during summation, I wheel this, VHS contraption over. You could see the trial jurors were rolling their eyes. And I held up my hand and said, relax. I'm not going to show you 6 hours. I'm going to show you 15 seconds. And I'm going to ask you at the end of those 15 seconds, if in fact this defendant confessed to murdering that little boy. Well, you could have heard a pin drop. So I hit the play button. The detective looks at Allen and says, what do you think about your little boy? And he looks in the camera and says, he was a very important part of my life. And I hit the stop button. And I look at the 12 jurors and I said, what would it take while the entire community is hoping that your little boy is alive? Everybody in town is looking for that little boy. What would it take for you to refer to that child in the past tense. They took one vote and convicted the guy.
Mm. Most people in the public realm, their experience of a prosecutor comes with being on a jury. I'm curious, what is it you teach yourself about what's most important in connecting with a jury?
Most cases are won by jury selection. So when I pick a jury, I'm asking myself, if I never was a trial lawyer, if I just met this person, would I want to sit down and talk to him? Would I want to play around a golf with them? Would I want to have a beer with them? Would I want to have dinner with them? Are they relating to me? Do they like me? Do they respect me? Are they answering the questions? Most of the time, it's an amazing system. Most of the time, juries get it right.
What have you learned about you from being a DA?
Well, good question. By the way, Jim, I would pick you as juror, which is a compliment.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to hear that.
What have I learned about myself? Well, I can't lie. I tease our Attorney General, Letitia James. Tish, you have to deal with 62 prima donnas, but at least I admit I'm one of them, okay? And it's a kind of a running joke. You can't be in this business unless you have self-confidence, unless you have an ego, unless you like to talk and like to think. So, but what I've learned about myself is that people respect me as DA because I understand what they're going through. They are my sister, my brother, and I will get justice for my sister and my brother. That's what I've learned about myself.
Beautifully said. We thank you, DA Fitzpatrick in Syracuse, Onondaga County, New York. All the best in your upcoming election and in your subsequent years of service, whatever they may be.
Jim, I enjoyed this very much. I can get you an absentee ballot for November. I mean, who's going to prosecute it? Not me.
Right. I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All the best.
All the best, Jim. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. There you have it, dear listeners. The latest episode in our Citizen Arts series, In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. We hope you found this conversation with District Attorney William Fitzpatrick enlightening, and we hope you'll join us for upcoming episodes with the likes of mayors, medical examiners, economic developers, tax collectors, U.S. Congresspeople, and more. Citizen Arts is dedicated to presenting information, analysis, and constructive opinion about matters of civic importance. We're a not-for-profit 501c3 organization. Your interest in and support of our work are greatly appreciated. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast. On behalf of District Attorney William Fitzpatrick and my Citizen Arts colleagues, heartfelt thanks for tuning in. I'm especially grateful to Jill Gabe, our executive producer, and Jeff Lewis, our project producer and technical guru. A special shout out to Grant Reher, who put us in touch with DA Fitzpatrick. We invite you to join the conversation. Check in at citizenartscreative.org and let us know what you think. And always, please stay healthy in mind and body, wealthy in goodwill, and wise in action.